Okay, thanks. So I think this will be fine. But hello, welcome everyone to this lecture by our friend Gennady Estraikh. Today, he's going to be touching a bit on this poem by Evgeny Evtushenko, Babi. And for those who don't know, Babi was massacred by the Nazis on, I believe, around 30,000 Jews outside the city of Kiev in a very short span. It's a very terrible event, but it was not covered much in Soviet Russia until kind of this poem rose to prominence. And by the way, my name is Phil Peterfoy, and I'm the head of the Russian Eurasian student organization here, you know, Russian Club for short, if you want to call it that. Yeah, thank you. And I'd also like to thank World Language Department for helping this happen, as well as the Jewish Studies Department. And then I'd like to thank Jody P. over at the union for helping putting all this together, and as well as Nadia, Gennady himself for making time out to fly out to Arkansas from NYU, as well as the rest of my Russian club members. He originally was from Ukraine, born there, but lived in Russia for most of his life before moving to Oxford to get his PhD after the Soviet Union fell. And he now teaches at NYU, New York University, and he's written various books and edited various books on studies in Eastern Europe and on Yiddish and other Jewish studies as well. Hope y'all enjoy this lecture, and it gives me pleasure to introduce Gennady Estraikh.
Thank you very much. Is it okay with the sound, yes? Or maybe without the mic? Yeah, it'll be fine. Okay. Especially as I'm not going to present a paper, I'm going to give a talk. A talk on Evgeny Evtushenko's Babi. And for the first time, of course, I grew up with this information about Babi. I was born in Ukraine, not in Kiev, where Babi is the place, and I explain the meaning of Babi. But still, it was in Ukraine. Of course, I don't remember exactly when for the first time I heard about this massacre in Babi, but certainly somehow it became part of my knowledge from the early years. But I never participated in a research team or never was doing an individual research on Babi. In 2011, I got an invitation from Brandeis University to come and to talk on Babi. And I was surprised because, you know, not my subject. But the answer was, look, you are from Ukraine, you have to. You have no choice, yes? And I was surprised, okay, that would be. And so I focused on Babi and gave a paper on Babi, but still it was a sort of, and it remains sort of a sideline. And now I'm writing a book on a monograph that focuses on Soviet Jewish history for the period of the 1950s, 1960s. And of course, this poem was published in 1961. And when Nadia asked me what kind of a topic I'm going to select, I decided, okay, Babi, because I just finished a chapter on Babi, and I didn't realize that actually Evtushenko is somewhere in your catchment area, in your neighborhood, yes, a couple of hours from his place, because my American geography is not so good. In any case, what I suggest to do, I suggest to do what we can call the context. Because my experience of teaching Russian-related history, Jewish-related history, European-related history, and even American-related history, tells me that the most difficult part of teaching is the context. You know, to give the context in order to understand what is going on, especially if the subject is not exactly mainstream. And I don't have an experience of teaching mainstream subjects. And I remember about 20 years ago, I went in London to the National Gallery, and there was a very interesting exhibition. The exhibition of one painting. one painting, but it was a number of rooms. So it was around this one painting. There was a room about the painter, the artist, and various other paintings by this artist. There was a room with the artifacts actually illustrating the setting. There was a room about history and so on. So let's try to do some, or I'll try to do something similar, to put this poem that is a very important poem, a very important text, and a very important story or a page in Soviet Jewish history, and not only Soviet Jewish history. The older generation of American Jews, that at least from my experience, immediately react to the name Evtushenko. And the reaction is not because they are so well read in Evtushenko's poetry. It's only Babi. Babi made him a household name among Jews in the Soviet Union, among Jews outside the Soviet Union. It shaped his entire life. It brought him eventually to the United States and to the University of Tulsa and so on. And he remains a household name to a significant degree, still thanks to one poem, though he is an excellent poet, of course, and it's very strange, you know, this bias. Just one poet on a Jewish-related topic by a poet who is not Jewish. Yes, so this combination. So in order to put into the context, I'll give a jump of a century. Next year, many people will mark, and some people will even celebrate the centenary of the revolutionary year in Russia. 1917, two revolutions. In the first months of the year, one revolution, sort of a democracy, was brought, and half a year later, another revolution that brought the Bolshevik regime, and the regime that stayed for 7 decades. In Russian Jewish history, it was an important moment in many ways, because before 1917, there was maybe your library also have this a very thick volume published in the Russian Empire that contained various legal regulations, specifically about Jews or concerning Jews in the Russian Empire, where they could live, where they could study, how they were supposed to move from one place to another place, and so on. It's a volume. And one of the restrictions was that Jews were supposed to live only in some areas of the Russian Empire called as the Pale of Jewish Settlement. In other places, only some privileged categories of Jews were allowed to live. Kiev, the place that actually is very important for our story, was outside the Pale of Jewish Settlement. It was actually, to be precise, so it was inside the Pale of Jewish Settlement. It was surrounded from all sides by the Pale of Jewish Settlement. It was by the end, you know, people could take a streetcar drive to the Pale of Jewish Settlement, because the outskirts of Kiev, and nowadays it's part of the city, it was already the Pale of Jewish Settlement. But the city itself was outside, because this is a city that plays an important symbolic role in Russian history, in Russian culture. It's the cradle, at least it's seen as the cradle of the Russian Christianity, the Russian Orthodox Church. This is, according to the mythology, at least it's from the beginning, when and where Russians turned to Christianity. So, of course, Jews were not supposed to live there. You know, only some very privileged categories were allowed privilege. Rich people usually wanted to be privileged. Usually to be rich or to be very useful as professionals, they were allowed to settle, but otherwise it was outside. Beginning from the 1970s, Jews were allowed to live everywhere in the former Russian Empire. Not only Jews, it was actually the universal sort of ruining of all fences, ethnic and religious fences in society. And Kiev became one of the main urban centers with very significant Jewish population. By 1941, 160,000 Jews lived in Kiev, about 20% of the entire population of the city. And of course it was less than in Moscow, where there was about 250,000 Jews, and it was less than, say, in Leningrad, where there were 200,000 Jews, but still it was a very significant place in Jewish settlement of the Jewish population in the Soviet Union, and a very important cultural center. What kind of Jews lived there? Of course, the privileged group who lived before 1917, some of them stayed, but many of them emigrated after 1917, because the revolution, this is sort of a stereotype, that the revolution made Jews happy. Because equality, because no Paleo-Jewish settlement, because no difference. And really, for some groups or some segments of the Jewish population, a revolution was a very important, very nice turning point. But at the same time, for many Jews, it was not really a nice change. First of all, it was not very nice for people who owned something. A person who owned a factory, a person who owned a store, a person who owned any business. Of course, during the communist period, they couldn't own it. So it disappeared absolutely from their hands. It was also a problem for people who rejected the communist ideology. In Kiev, before the revolution, was a place, a significant center for the Zionist movement, religious movement, and of course such movements and such ideologies weren't compatible with the communist regime. So it was also either they had to hide, or the regime suppressed them, or they had to emigrate. It was also very difficult for just artisans, and among Jews, about 30% of Jews in Russia were artisans. Yes. And many artisans, of course, lost their job, because to have a private enterprise, even an enterprise for one person, was a real problem in the Soviet system. It had a different model, an economic model. But in any case, 160,000 Jews, intellectuals, artisans, proletarians, students, of members of the Communist Party, and so on, officers who lived in Kiev. In Kiev, when the war started in 1941, the war between Germany and the Soviet Union. So I'll remind you that the Second World War started, or usually will come from September 1st, 1939, when Germany attacked Poland, and 17 days later, Russia attacked Poland, and Poland disappeared from the map. You know, they divided it. 51% went to the Soviet Union, 49% went to Germany, and for a while in the Soviet Union there was a hope that, you know, this was a recipe for survival, or at least for a significant delay of the war. But there was a delay, but not very significant. In June 22nd, Germany attacked the Soviet Union. And very soon, by the 19th of September, they came to Kiev. And it's a very long way from the western borders to Kiev. But still, it took them a very short period of time when they managed to capture this city. By the time when they entered Kiev, about 100,000 Jews left the city, evacuated either as individuals or together with various enterprises, organizations, and so on in an organized form. And so 60,000 Jews stayed behind. Why? And it's, it's always a question, why did the Jews stay behind? Especially as there was a chance, the war started in June, and still till September, there was plenty of time to evacuate with terrain. A few reasons. One reason, there was no actually any campaign really to evacuate specifically the Jewish population. And such a campaign couldn't exist. Can you imagine? A war, and suddenly the government announced, okay, you can stay behind, but we decided to save the Jews. Or we decided to save, I don't know who, because it's because of this. So, in addition, what is also important to keep in mind, that till this June the 22nd, the Soviet Union and Germany were friends, officially friends, and anti-German propaganda in the Soviet Union was suppressed completely. And it's also important to keep in mind that in the Soviet Union, when there's a decision to suppress this propaganda, it meant that it was suppressed universally, because the entire press, the entire media was, of course, under the control of the state. So there was no propaganda, and many Jews actually didn't know, or somehow the information was very, it wasn't clear what was going on actually in the territories occupied already by the Germans or in Germany. There was one more fact. Many Jews remember the First World War. And the situation during the First World War was significantly different. During the First World War, actually, quite often the attitude of the German army was much warmer to Jews than to the Slavic population. And actually, during the First World War, the Russian government and the Russian army believed that the Jewish population of Russia was mainly on the side of the Germans. And actually there were even campaigns of moving Jews from the front line as far as possible to move them out, because they were seen as a questionable segment of the population. Moreover, the Germans came to Russia with a message, look, we're maybe not brothers, but we're maybe cousins or something else, because Yiddish is similar to German, and then culturally we have a similar language, so we came to liberate you from the oppression of all the Russians. And some people remembered it, or many people remembered it, and some people believed that, or to be precise, they didn't believe the Soviet propaganda, and believed that actually we remember it, and we'll stay. I came from Jerusalem 2 or 3 days ago. There was a conference at Yad Vashem, the center, the museum that deals with the Holocaust. And they quoted or mentioned some episodes when some Jews, naive Jews, believed that the Germans would come and this person would open a store, as he used to have it before 1917. So there were even such extremely naive and misinformed sort of ideas. Some people simply couldn't believe because someone was ill, and the mother is ill, and I don't want to do with my mother, and many reasons. So in any case, 60,000 Jews stayed in Kiev. The Germans came, and there was a factor at that time that played a very significant role, a tragic role, in the destiny of the Kiev Jews, that the Red Army, the Soviet army, when the army was retreating, it left a system of mines and bombs in the central part of Kiev. And after waiting for a few days, when the German headquarters moved into the central buildings, that of course was predicted in the center. They organized actually a series of bomb explosions with very significant loss for the German army, officers and so on in the headquarters. So the revenge, and for the revenge the choice was clear, Jews. For 2 days, September 29 and September the 30th, that coincided, I believe it's coincided, I'm not sure that the Germans were really looking into the Jewish calendar. It was the day of Yom Kippur. So 2 days, and days very, usually the Germans in the Soviet Union, they behaved in a different way. So in west part of Europe, there is quite often a clear statistics. Statistics quite often with names, with the archives of the Jews murdered by the Nazis. In the East, they didn't care about statistics. Usually they just murdered the population and somehow roughly, to keep it without Jews in hundreds and so on. But for the 2 days in Kiev, these statistics of not just 30,000 people, but 33,771 persons were executed, really executed in 2 days. So it was, for 2 days, a machinery of death was operating. So they gave an order before starting this execution. They gave an order to take for each Jewish person in Kiev to come to a specific place. And the information was very misleading. The information was that the Jews were supposed to be ready to resettle, to bring food for 3 days and some things that they needed for 2 days to prepare resettlement. There were even rumors in Kiev that, look, once again it's good for Jews. We are staying behind and the Germans are going to resettle the Jews. In the reality, they were brought to a place. Here the name Babi comes. At that time it was not in the central part of the city, it was in the outskirts. And Babi Yar is a ravine, so they decided that as a landscape it was a good place for this mass execution. And they gunned down people. I'm not going to describe this kind of picture. There are descriptions of this. In any case, there's statistics of over 33,000 in 2 days. How did they know that this person was Jewish? And what did it mean at that time to be Jewish? The thing is that in the Soviet Union, what is Jewishness in the United States? Yes. The person is saying, I'm Jewish. It's enough. Of course, it's maybe not enough for a specific act to marry. Maybe it's not a specific act, where some religious authorities will judge how Jewish, how deeply Jewish, or whatever, to what denomination of Jewishness you belong. But it's actually, if a person doesn't want to be Jewish, this person is not Jewish, yes. In the papers, in IDs, there's no information that this person is Jewish or not Jewish or something. In the Soviet Union, the situation was different. Beginning from 1932, each person had a passport, and not a passport in the terms of what we know as a passport, to travel abroad. There was a passport, an internal passport. And this internal passport had an entry in which each person was labeled ethnically. It wasn't religiously. Religiously, it was a problem. The person was labeled ethnically. Jewish, Ukrainian, Georgian, and so on, 100 ethnic groups in the Soviet Union. To be labeled as, say, Jewish or anything like this, it meant the following. At the age of 16, such a document would be issued at the age of 16. A person would come to a registration office, a specific one, and if this person had parents of the same ethnicity, automatically this person would be classified as a person belonging to whatever his or her parents belong. It had, again, nothing to do with the religious affiliation, nothing to do with the cultural or whatever choice. It was only the ethnic choice, in a sense, a racist choice. Yes. A person who had parents belonging to different ethnic groups had a chance to choose, but only from these two groups. So I'll give you an example of such. For example, a person who was born in Moscow knew only one language, Russian, and culturally was 100% Russian, but it happened that one of his parents was classified as Georgian, and another parent was classified as Jewish. So this person couldn't become Russian. This person had to choose between being Jewish or Georgian or something else. So this is what they chose. In any case, every person had this entry nationality, and not only in the passport, but also in various other documents, including the library reading card. It was really something like this. As a result, when the Germans came, they had a source of information. It was written in the IDs, in this internal passports, if the person was Jewish, then Jewish. And such people came. Sometimes among those who were executed, there was some percentage, I don't know exactly what the percentage of non-Jewish people, a spouse would choose to go together with his or her non-Jewish Jewish spouse. Such cases also. But in general, the bulk of them were Jewish, especially as the number of mixed marriages by the time was quite insignificant. Later, this place, the Babi, was used during the entire period of the German occupation, and the German occupation continued till October 1943, so we're speaking about 2 years. Continuously continued to be used by the Germans as a place for executions. For executions of Jews, because remember, about 60,000 Jews were left in Kiev but by the time, and they murdered 33,000, so they continued to look for Jews everywhere. Some of them were hiding, some of them were somehow pretending or found a way to pretend being Ukrainians, Russians, or something else, or managed to move out from the city and find a place for survival. But many of them continued to be found as Jews and brought to this Babi on a regular basis. This was also a place where the Germans executed members of the resistance movement, where they executed people from mental institutions, where they executed people even belonging to various groups of the Ukrainian cultural or political movements that they disagreed with. So as a result, these are statistics of at least 100,000 people murdered in Babi Yar, and sometimes people give 150,000 people murdered there. There's a debate whether the majority of them were Jewish or not Jewish, you know, contemporary historians argue that still the majority of those killed in Babi are Jewish, but in any case, this is the story of Estraikh. In October 1943, the Red Army came back to Kiev, and in Kiev, a commission, and it was in general a routine that every time when the Red Army would move into a place, a commission would be organized to understand what was going on and to commit it to paper, a report, what had happened during the Nazi occupation. It was also in Kiev the same story. Some of the perpetrators, actually some of those who participated in the shooting, and there were two categories of people who participated in the shooting. First of all, the Germans, the units, the Sonderkommando, who really were doing the shooting, but also the Ukrainian police. And once again, it's not clear, you know, there are academic debates whether the Ukrainians really were murdering or only bringing people to the side, only, you know, participating in the secondary roles. But in any case, both groups played an active role in the shootings, and some of them were put on trial during the war and executed. During the war, the trial and execution was really very short trial. Beginning from 1945, there were projects of memorialization. There was even a project of a memorial. It was published, this project of a memorial. It was published in the Yiddish newspaper at that time in Moscow. There was a Yiddish newspaper, Estraikh, Unity. And a budget was allocated, but it never happened. It never happened because very soon after the end of the war, and actually for the first time in the Soviet history, by that time for the first time in the Soviet history, the Soviet regime organized an anti-Semitic campaign. And it's a separate story, but to put it in a couple of lines, people were arrested, mainly intellectuals, Jewish intellectuals. Some of them executed, some of them were sent to labor camps, some of them kept in prison. And there were a few cases, but the general motive of this anti-Jewish campaign was that Jews were not revived. That Jews were really that they established contacts with foreign Jews, that they dreamt about something else, not really about a Soviet regime, that they were full of nationalist ideas, and in general that they were questionable. Around that time there were even rumors about universal sort of a cleansing of moving the entire Jewish population to the far eastern areas of the Soviet Union, as previously had been done a few times during the war period, when entire ethnic groups in the Soviet Union would be moved from the place where they lived to some western areas. It happened to the Chechens, it happened to the Crimean Tatars, it happened to various ethnic groups. So it wasn't really so exotic, but it never happened, and some historians argue that it never happened simply because Stalin died in 1953, in March 1953, that otherwise some tragedy of this kind would have happened. In any case, Stalin died, and a new period started. The period that is known in history as the period of a thought, T-H-A-W. Because such a novel came out written by a prominent writer. He was Jewish, but he was not a Jewish writer. And this was a novel, very actually, as a literary piece, very weak. But symbolically, he touched really this topic, the nerve of the time, the thought, a change, really a change. can be seen as a thaw without any spring, just developed. But in any case, this became the symbol, and the symbol actually of liberalization. Liberalization after the Stalinist period, that many things became possible that previously were dangerous, and especially in intellectual life. Intellectual life of this period of the 1950s, the first half of the 1960s, is a period of remarkable success. Very interesting writers, very interesting films, plays, and so on. And we see new names in Russian literature, and one of the names was Evgeny Evtushenko. And Evgeny Evtushenko was a group of poets. At that time, poetry was in fashion. Now it's difficult even to imagine. Can you imagine a gathering of a few thousand people coming together to listen to poetry? It's a bit crazy. But at that time it was known. It was really popular to memorize poetry. You know, it was, I believe it was even a good thing for matchmaking. Somehow it made it stronger. This guy knows poetry, or she knows poetry. So there's, yeah, it's for matchmaking. In any case, at that time, poetry was something, and poets were very popular. Poets would read poetry somewhere in a square in Moscow, or some place that could emanate a significant audience. And Evtushenko was one of them. He was born in 1933, somewhere beyond the pale in Russia, in the finest place. And for a while, from what I read, he dreamt to become a soccer player. But somehow he moved from playing soccer to poetry, and ended up as a student in Moscow at the Institute for Literature, Literary Institute. There's also a unique establishment, and it emphasizes the role of literature in Soviet society. Because literature played a very important role in society. Literature was seen as an instrument for education, instrument for spreading ideas, and it was strictly under the control of the state. Stalin himself would read, and judge poems, would judge novels, would judge films, and so on. It was the Stalin Prize, and quite often it was not only in the name, but he really decided, okay, this is good, the category number one. This is maybe category number two, or no category. So in 1934, in the Soviet Union, writers were organized into a sort of a writing or literary industry, called as Soviet Writers Union. And some people argue that it was really, to become a member of the Soviet Writers Union, it was more or less as to get, to become a colonel in the army. I don't know how it's compatible, but in any case, it was a very respected role in society. And somehow there was an idea that the state was able to train writers. And it's also great just to create an institution to train writers. We can imagine an institution to train editors, we can an institution to train proofreaders, but to train writers. In any case, such an institute was established in Moscow, and it still exists, this institute. And actually it was a place where people would be trained to be writers, and usually when talented people would spend a few years in the institute, and they were still talented and would become writers. People with minimal talent would spend years in the institute and would become editors, would become critics or something else. In any case, Evtushenko became a student at the institute, and from the very beginning he was difficult. And actually, I scanned the foreign press. Now, with the computers you can put Evtushenko whatever, in New York Times, Guardian, whatever comes to it. And it's clear that beginning from the mid-1950s, he was known also outside the Soviet Union. He was seen as an interesting guy, a troublemaker. Some journalists even called him the angry young man, or sometimes a group of them as angry young men. Actually, a couple of years later, he came to England, I remember, and a young woman looked at him. He doesn't look angry, yes. But in any case, this title was an angry young man, and he became one of the group of popular poets who would, actually at that time I mentioned before that there were literary evenings with many people, and from time to time such a poet as Evtushenko would travel from one place to another place and read poetry and somehow feeling the feedback. In 1961, he came to Kiev, and he came to Kiev. It was poetic reading. And in Kiev, he had a friend. They were together students at the Literary Institute. His friend's name was Anatoly Kuznetsov. And Anatoly Kuznetsov was a witness of the tragedy of the Babi. At that time, he was 14 or something else of this kind. He wasn't Jewish. And as a result, he could see it from the outside. And later, in the 1960s, he would write a novel called Babi. That was published, this novel was published by Babi, so he was really interested in it. And he took his friend Evtushenko and brought him to the place Babi. Evtushenko, either he didn't know about it, or somehow the place itself, one thing is to know it, and another thing is to see it. And the same night, at least the story goes like this, that the same night he wrote this book. And the point, what was really remarkable in this book? The point was no monument stands over Babi. This is important. So many years later, 20 years after the execution, there was no monument. But to be honest, it wasn't so remarkable. Because by that time, there was really the number of monuments, this wartime monuments in various places, was minimal. In general, it's everywhere. The historians, that is a separate scholarship about memorialization and when people usually come to the moment of memorializing as building the monument. It takes time. It takes time and usually 20, 25 years. The distance is important. But still, it was a statement. Such a place that everyone knows. In the Soviet Union, Babi was more or less the same as in the West, Auschwitz. This was really Babi. It was a symbol of the Holocaust in the Soviet Union. There's no monument, but the main point is that by the end, we don't see, but you have the text, that he spelled out this forbidden notion, anti-Semitism. That he brought the things together, the absence of the memorial, and that the reason is anti-Semitism. Very soon, after a couple of days in Kiev, he returned to Moscow and came to the offices of the newspaper. It is in Russian, it's called Literary Gazette, or literary newspaper. The weekly published it was the main actually publication, the main periodical of the Soviet writers. A very popular newspaper. And it was not only for writers actually, it was a newspaper in a sense for intellectuals in the Soviet Union with hundreds of thousands of subscribers. So newspaper, there was a section specifically for writers and specifically and that on various intellectual issues. And this newspaper on the 19th of September published this poem. So the question, why? Were they so brave? Because it was really brave to spell out anti-Semitism. Because anti-Semitism, it wasn't an anti-Semitism of some, low-profile people in Kiev. It was anti-Semitism of those who could allow or not allow to build a monument. So, top authorities. First of all, it was the period of liberalization. And people and intellectuals believed that many things were possible. Second, the newspaper actually started this conversation about the monument or absence of monument in Kiev in 1950. And from time to time they published material without using the notion of anti-Semitism. And now they came with the anti-Semitism. They published it very carefully. They published actually 3 poems by Evtushenko, 2 poems about Fidel Castro, and behind Fidel Castro, now late Fidel Castro, it was hidden, this Babi, as you know, somewhere, the last page of the newspaper. Still, this poem immediately became a sensation. It became a sensation in the Soviet Union, and it became a sensation outside the Soviet Union. It immediately was translated, numerous times translated into English and other languages in the Soviet Union. It actually, the response was a divided response. Some people, Russian nationalists, accused him of just playing a wrong card. They reminded him that, look, the main or the most significant number of people who didn't survive the Second World War were non-Jewish. And really, in the Soviet Union, the number of the losses of the Second World War, estimates of the losses, is about 27 million people. Huge number. The loss of Jewish life is about 2.5 million people. So, of course, 27 million people, 2.5 million people. If we think not in the proportion to the Jewish population, or only in the proportion of the general population, then it's not insignificant, but still. At the same time, my impression is, and my impression is based on looking into the archival material, but the archival material that I looked into contains letters written by Soviet people as a response to reading this book. So some people, they have, it's difficult for me to understand the psychology of this, but people read the poem, write a letter to the newspaper. I like it. But actually, we read now in the newspaper, in New York Times, we read every day. I disagree, I agree, I hate, I welcome, and so on. So this sort of things. And a significant number of letters are preserved in one of the Moscow archives. The bulk of the letters that I read are written by non-Jews. And usually they are letters Evtushenko is right. We have to stop this. That anti-Semitism is something that really is changing our society. There are sometimes really heartbreaking letters and naive letters, actually showing, the Soviet isolation. For example, one of the letters is written by a teacher who writes, look, I have in my class a Jewish student. His name is, if I'm not wrong, Hilshevich. And I look at him, and my impression that it's not a Soviet setting, but it's a setting of the United States. Because the propaganda, everything was wrong with the United States. And it's a setting that Hilshevich is not a white person, but an African American. But in our context, and he's bullied, and he's oppressed, and he's something. So these sort of parallels we find. By the way, the most questionable letters were written by Jewish authors. Somehow, no, it's wrong. I'm also Jewish. I'm Jewish. And I disagree with it. Well, if in Soviet society, everyone is equal. There are some people here, but in general, they're equal. Or in general, such a letter such a poem is offensive, and somehow he helps the bourgeois propaganda, by writing such a letter, publishing such a. In any case, this poem, and I'm coming to from where I started, made Evtushenko a prologist. Beginning from 1962, he began to be invited. The first invitations came in 1961, but the Soviet Union wasn't a country that you could buy a ticket and to go to various places. It had to be blessed. It had to be allowed by the highest authorities. They didn't allow him to go to Israel, for example. He was invited to come to Israel, but he was allowed to come to England, to Italy. Finally, very soon, to the United States. Actually, from what I read in the press, and from what I read in some pieces of memoirs, it was quite an ambivalent sort of reception. That they continued to like his poem, but they couldn't understand what kind of a guy this person was. First of all, he wasn't angry. Then he looked to America. It was also confusing. Somehow he looks like an American. They expected someone really Russian. Second, that some people argue that he was very arrogant. But still, he was especially warmly welcome in the Jewish quarters of Western societies. He became a symbol of sort of a dissident movement, although in the reality, I believe he wasn't a dissident. And really, the fact itself that he was allowed to travel, and travel on a regular basis, it was such a privilege in Soviet society to be allowed to travel. That, I believe that he was used, and he knew that he was used. And it was important for the Soviet regime to have a person, and a few people of this time, to show that, look, we're not really a closed society. We're a society where we easily tolerate such people as Evtushenko. He writes, we disagree, but we allow him to travel. We publish his stuff, and he's recognized, and he's a member of literary societies, and it's fine. And somehow he played this role. Later it created actually a foundation of his conflict inside the literary community, in particular with Joseph Brodsky, later the poet, really, I believe that it was really that he couldn't take and he couldn't stomach this sort of this sort of compromise, this sort of sitting on between two chairs, or at the same time two chairs. But in the Soviet Union, the poem was published once in 1961, on the 19th of September, and then it wouldn't be included into any books, into any publications by Evtushenko. Moreover, I came across a report of the head of the Kiev KGB, the secret police, in 1969, that actually by that time, I hope that they never found this guy, but that someone in Kiev distributed. So what this person did, he somehow found or created, maybe from some telephone book. He sent as a letter a copy of Evtushenko's poem, on the eve of the anniversary of this Babi massacre. So the poem became a symbol of this protest, of not remembering or suppressing the memory of Babi. It was for the first time published in 1984, so 23 years later, in one of his volumes, with a footnote. And the footnote was how horrible the Zionists were, and that it was important to fight for the peace in the Middle East, to protect the Palestinian population and so on. So it was absolutely irrelevant to the text, but it was important to publish apparently to create a balance. The poem and the discussion around the poem played a very important role in creating a formula, in finding a formula how to write about the Holocaust in the Soviet Union. Especially as Nikita Khrushchev himself, the leader of the state, in March 1962, formulated his vision of such a formula. First of all, he accused Evtushenko of creating a biased picture. If you read Evtushenko, the impression is that the Germans came to murder Jews only. You have to create a balanced picture. And this balance became the formula for writing about the Holocaust. The writer was supposed to show Jews, nice Jews, but also a Jewish collaborator. It was collaborators say Ukrainians, but it was important to find to show also Ukrainians who say Jews, Ukrainians or whatever. So this sort of, and even eventually it was developed that it was important to show a nice German. Because if you remember, the eastern part of Germany was part of the socialist. So this was a sort of a development to a significant degree after the publication and discussion of around Evtushenko's poem. Nowadays, it's a page in history, because I am writing about this period, but my impression, I know that recently, actually a few weeks ago, Evtushenko had a reading at some event in Moscow, and he's not a young man, yes, but it was for 3 hours. Yeah, I didn't have a chance to be there, but I thought that it was very successful, and it was very interesting. But I believe that he is a name remains a significant name for people, as always, in the know, and mainly for people belonging to an older generation. I'm sure that the younger generation of Russian readers, Russian speakers, I'm not so sure. Because Evgeny Evtushenko was, though he remained very popular, and he actually most in the Soviet Union. If outside the Soviet Union it was Babi. Inside the Soviet Union, he was mainly popular because many of his poems became songs. Very popular pop songs in the Soviet Union, so it's a kind of a paradox that Babi and the pop songs. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that, of course. And we'd like to open the floor to any questions. If anyone has any to ask, feel free to raise your hand. Okay.
I think the life of Ivan Denisovich came out in 1961
That's right.
as well. Was there any relationship between the two?
Evtushenko and Solzhenitsyn.
That too, but also between reception. We were talking about letters.
Yes, but thank you, it's a good question. You're right, at 1961, and in general this period of time, it was the time when some things came out. A year later or 2 years later, their publication would have been impossible. But the stories, of course, both stories belong to the period, the Stalinist period. Yeah. But still, they're different stories. One story is the Gulag, and it's at that time it was legal. It was legal to discuss. It was maybe, and certainly some people in Soviet society were happy about this. Very strong Stalinist history, but it was somehow it didn't have the ethnic component. It was an ideological component. It was and the component was Stalin really great, or was Stalin ignoring this. In the case of Evtushenko's poem, it was something else. It was the Jewish issue. The Jewish issue, and in general in Soviet society, the issue of ethnic relations, but especially the Jewish issue. Especially as it was painful. The issue of and the story of Jews who became successful, and many Jews became successful, a significant segment of the Jewish population in the Soviet Union, were very successful during this period. If we take the average life standard, but certainly an average Jewish person, a Jewish family lived better than an average non-Jewish family. They lived in cities. Many of them played very significant roles in society. In Moscow, in the 1950s, there were roughly 1,500 members of the Writers' Union. At least 30% of them were Jewish. In the Soviet Union of Composers, the percent was even higher. In the movies, we know about the Hollywood, Jews in the Hollywood, but we can see a similar development of course, in the Soviet Union. So people were successful. And of course, this created resentment, quite often, among non-Jews. In addition, there was also a story that circulated that Jews didn't want to fight during the Second World War. There was this mythology of not fighting. And this mythology of not fighting had to do with a few things. One thing was that during the Second World War, a significant number, roughly 250,000 Jews were at that time in the Soviet Union, but they came from Poland. In 1939, during the beginning of the Second World War, a significant number of refugees moved from the German-occupied territories of Poland to the Soviet Union, and a significant number of Polish Jews became Soviet overnight. Many of them didn't have Soviet citizenship. And those of them who survived in the eastern areas of the Soviet Union, the irony was that they had a better chance to survive because on the eve of the war, they were expelled to the eastern areas of the Soviet Union as a dangerous, questionable element. As a result, they had a better chance to survive. Why I'm mentioning that during the war, people somewhere in the Urals, in Uzbekistan and somewhere else would see able-bodied Jewish people who weren't in the army. But they weren't in the army because they were not Soviet citizens. And some of them would write letters, and I was reading, now I brought from this, my trip to Israel, and I got as a gift letters of Polish Jews who wrote to various authorities that, look, I am a Polish citizen. I want to fight together with the Red Army, but the Red Army is not accessible for me because I'm not a Soviet citizen. The Polish Army, at that time they were formation, they don't want to take me because I'm Jewish. So but in any case, this is theory. The practical side, that people, look, where so many Jews are around, and this was an important foundation for creating this mythology that Jews didn't fight. They were somewhere in Tashkent. They were somewhere in Uzbekistan hiding and so on. And this was very strong component of these anti-Semitic feelings during this period. And actually, Evtushenko was seen as a person who was trying to whitewash Jews. I mean, by anti-Semitic Jews. Evtushenko, there were even rumors that he himself was Jewish. It was quite common during the Soviet period to label a person that if a person was questionable, it means that he's Jewish, hiding his Jewish identity or her Jewish identity. So it was, you're right. On the one hand, the publication itself of the poem and of Ivan Denisovich by Sal in 1961, in this period of time, it was a reflection of the climate in society at that time. But the reception was different. It was from different.
I know that artists themselves are notoriously bad about talking of their own work, but what did Evtushenko have to say about that period, especially the compilations that were later published about the poem?
That was his poem, yeah? Yeah, it's right. I'm sure of this. And I'm pretty sure that's very painful. Because we can suspect him or whatever, argue that he was not this, but he was certainly a poet. You know, to steal a poem from another, no, it's not.
No, I didn't mean to.
No,
I mean, what did he?
But he himself, I read carefully his memoirs, and he was very prolific in writing. This question. Well, it's a sort of a self-created mythology, of course, as in many cases. Yes. Because when you compare it with the historical facts, actually, it's not. For example, in his memoirs, the editor of the Literaturная Gazeta was immediately removed. He wasn't removed. He actually had continued to be editor. It's well known. He continued to be editor of Literaturная Gazeta for at least a year or longer, and then he was removed. But what removed? He was appointed to be the director of the most significant publishing house in the Soviet Union. It's not exactly a removal, yes. And no, sometimes he's a poet. And as a poet, you know, he presents his own vision of reality, poetic vision of reality. So his memoirs, I believe, we have to read as a poetic document, not as a document of history or society.
Based on that, and also what you were saying about a person having to choose one or the other ethnicity, there's also Soviet mythology. So with all of these different mythologies at stake, when he writes Russia of my heart, I know that you are international by inner nature, but often those whose hands are steeped in filth abused your purest name in name of hatred. I'm curious, do you have any insight into what he was getting at when he said your purest name?
Because he believed, and he repeated many times afterwards, that he actually, his point to protect his objective, whatever, his idea that he was writing this poem, is to protect the purity really of the real Russian nation. He argued that the real Russian nation was an anti-Semitic. And actually, judging by the letters, it seemed that he's right. He was right. Yes, that he wanted to emphasize, look, there is a different Russia, and I represent a different Russia, and I emphasize that this pure Russia exists, and we have to get rid of anti-Semitism that doesn't represent this pure version of Russia.
But nothing more specific as to what that pure Russia is, only negatively defined as not anti-Semitic.
It's Russia. One of them, I loved it, in The Guardian, one of the journalists, I don't remember his name, he was at that time seen as the specialist #1 in the Soviet Union that I questioned, because he made such a mistake. But in any case, it was his resume. But he wrote, and he was right, that, you know, when I read this stuff, Evtushenko, it drives me crazy. Because the idea that I can feel, that look, if we are so bad, but it means also that we can be so good. And this idea of being bad and good and protecting something and trying to justify something that is wrong by the definition, this was what was driving mad such a person as this Soviet specialist. And this was characteristic for the entire generation, I believe. Not all of them, but for the bulk of the generation of Evtushenko, and plus the generation, he was too young, but those who were a bit older and participated in the war. So they were unhappy with what had happened during the Stalinist period. They were unhappy with many things that happened after the Stalinist period, but they continued to be 100% Soviet people, believing in purity of Soviet. There's a very interesting document. They know this name, Anatoly Rybakov. Some of you, of course, are professionally know. He was a Jewish, he was a writer, and he was a popular writer of stuff that maybe for children, or not children, but maybe school children here, this age. But later he wrote a novel that was called Heavy Sand. And this Heavy Sand was about Holocaust. Written according to this formula. Good Ukrainians, bad Ukrainians, a nice Jewish, a nice German person. So but in any case, it was a sensation. It was translated into English by Harry Shulman from Oxford, and so on. By the end of his life, he moved to New York, and I believe he died in it. And while in New York, he wrote a book, his last book, that was called A Novel of Memories. Some many about his life. That is very interesting. And I was reading this. And suddenly I came to the last chapter. And the last chapter was about the period of Estraikh. And this was a chapter of hatred. This person who was in the Gulag, he was in the Gulag when he was young. He survived this, he survived that, various problems as a Jewish person. He describes how difficult it was to publish this novel because it was about him. And suddenly when it comes to the Gorbachev period, it's full of hatred. And he explains this hatred somehow. He explained that, look, we are believers. We still believe in socialism. We believe that our system is the best one. And Mikhail Gorbachev, he is ruining this. I don't believe it. So this clash, and I believe that it was very common. I know from my experience, from my family's experience, from the people whom I know and knew, that it was very common. People who are ready to criticize many things in society, who hated Stalin, or whatever, at the same time believe that still it was the Soviet Union, and we have to be proud of being Soviet citizens. And actually, from this position of being proud Soviet citizens, they wrote this non-Jewish correspondence that Evtushenko was right. That we have to abolish this idea to make our society once again clean, once again pure. So this is.
I have a question. I'm just curious, how did Yiddish writers depict Babi? How did they represent?
It's a good, yeah. Actually, 3 years ago, I believe, it was 1 year when 2 doctoral dissertations came out on Babi in Soviet Russian and English literature. One of them was defended at the University of California, and another at the Jewish Theological Center. So the most significant piece on Babi was written, it's a novel by the writer Ehil Falikman, who wrote about it. There were poems also about Babi, but as a prosaic, as a piece of writing, it was this Moreover, they invent history. For example, in Ihil Falikman's story, some Ukrainians went together not because they had a husband, but simply they went together with the Jews in order to show resistance at the last moment. Take something, piece of something and to fight with the Nazis. This format, what is also important, apart from the balance, the second ingredient that was important for Soviet presentation of the Holocaust, resistance. It was important to show resistance, physical or whatever resistance, or at least more moral resistance. And an old lady who is still stronger than this SS officer. So, it was, what is also, I forgot to tell you, that it would be wrong to say that the Babi story was really suppressed in the Soviet Union. It wasn't suppressed. It was biased. It was changed. So Babi, there was a novel published by Anatoly Kuznetsov. There was a play by Alexander Bolshakovsky about Babi. So there were quite a few. Ukrainians wrote, the Ukrainian writers wrote about Babi. What was really important about what, and it is a continuing sort of a problem, how to memorialize Babi. Is it a Jewish place or not Jewish place? So as a result, at the moment there are a few memorials. So and this year it was an anniversary, it's 90 for how many years? 75, and it was really something that happened there with the president of Ukraine and Israeli representatives and so on. And once again, it was a decision to open another memorial. So it is every time it's an issue. Is it a purely Jewish place or it's not a Jewish place? And in the reality, it is really difficult to come to any decision because it started. The first actually who were executed were not Jewish. The first one mentally from a mental institution. They were executed. Then the Jews, then POWs, and so on and so on. And of course there's no statistics, really statistics. They are estimates. But it wasn't silenced. What all the Jews found really offensive, that the memorial that was finally opened in 1976 didn't have a trace of Jewishness. It wasn't really, we would say, okay, we don't know exactly, and there's a Russian person or a Ukrainian or whatever, and a Jewish person. No, it was absolutely just, generic faces that were there of a woman, of a child. This was all what people found really offensive. Good. Thank you.
Thank all of you for coming again. Have a good rest.